All right. Hi, everybody. You have made it to the final breakout session of Netroots. Congratulations. Thank you for being here. We have a great panel here for you today. Before I let them introduce themselves, I've got a question for you all. Raise your hand if you think American politics are working well right now. Okay, we got one surprise there. Yes, so you're at Netroots. You probably already know that the gridlock that we experience as a country is a feature and not a bug of the current electoral system. When you have first past the post elections, meaning whoever gets the most votes wins, even if a majority of people voted for somebody else, and single member districts, you are going to end up with a two-party system. It's Duverger's law. Right now in this country, according to Gallup in 2024, 28% of people identified as Democrats, 28% of people identified as Republicans, and 43% identified as independents. As long as the way that we elect people stays the same, we're gonna have the same results. Democrats and Republicans duking it out, independents and people in the middle not feeling represented at all, not seeing themselves and their values represented, and little work actually being done for the people. There are a myriad of ways that we can work to improve our electoral system, and the folks here, we all actually are from nonpartisan organizations, and we are working on some of these reforms. The one we're talking about today is one I think all of you are going to hear more and more about over the next 18 months. So congratulations, because you've got the scoop that we are about to have proportional representation in cities around the country. So proportional representation is when legislators are elected in proportion to the percentage of the vote that they have. Or the vote that they receive, excuse me. So if a third party candidate gets 15 to 20% of the vote, they might actually end up in office. What a crazy idea, right? That we would have something other than Democrats and Republicans in the halls of our Congress and in city councils across the country. So as you'll hear from our panelists, this is something that can occur at the local, state, and federal level. And when we have this, it's going to lead to elected bodies that look like the communities that they represent. So if you wish that we had more women, young people, people of color, renters representing us across the country, then proportional representation may be for you. So with that, I am going to have our panelists here introduce themselves. We'll just go left to right.
Hello everyone, my name is Pocosangre. I have a PhD in political science. I study comparative politics and American politics. I work at New America, it's a think tank based out of DC where we do research on electoral systems and political reform.
I'm Dustin Wahl, the Executive Director of Fix Our House, organization focused on electoral reform generally and proportional representation specifically at the federal level. So I work in Washington talking to lawmakers about how we can move in the direction of proportional representation.
Hi everyone, Michelle Whitaker. I'm the board chair for Represent Women. We focus on evaluating and identifying the systems changes that we need to make in our democracy that will help level the playing field for women to run, to win, and to lead at every level of government. And so our work really focuses on the impacts for women, but also understanding how those impacts also help in different ways, from racial diversity to just the way lawmakers work together. There's a lot of additional benefits that help with that, so that's our focus.
Great. And hi, Jenny Lee. I'm the Deputy Director at the Coalition of Communities of Color. We're an alliance of culturally specific organizations based in Portland, Oregon. We work on a really wide range of issues through our research and advocacy programs, but have also worked to help pass proportional representation in Portland.
And I'm Eileen Reavey. I'm the Executive Director of Rank the Vote. We are the grassroots movement advocating for ranked choice voting and proportional representation across the country. So Oscar, I'm gonna start with you. Proportional representation often gets talked about as a single concept, but can you walk us through the key types of proportional representation systems and how they differ and speak to the importance of thinking of how they will be applied locally?
Yeah, so just as a way of introduction for, I'll say PR because this is easier than proportional representation. So PR is a system most democracies in the world use these days. And like most new democracies, when they're thinking of like how to design their constitutions and their electoral systems, it's always between either PR or some ranking mechanism, like ranked choice voting or something like that. The American system is never an option. Like they never think of like, oh, let's do winner take all for these new democracies. And in fact, when the U.S. like promotes like or helps or consults with other countries to design their electoral systems, they never recommend voting systems. And the way PR works is it's a family of electoral systems that the main goal is to guarantee that the vote shares that parties and candidates get are proportional in the seats that then they get in the legislature. So if a party gets 30% of the votes, they can still win about roughly 30% of the seats in Congress or the legislature. That is done through different ways. The two main ingredients is having multi-member districts, so that more than one person can win in a district. So you have maybe like the first person who gets most of the votes gets the seat, but then also the second and third person. And that's what in political science we call the district magnitude, how many people win in each district. And the other ingredient is the formula that you use to translate the seats to votes. And that's a lot of like mathematical complications, but actually has like an American root because it was invented by Thomas Jefferson. He was one of the people who first created one of the formulas that most democracies use to translate vote shares to seats. In the proportional representation family, there's open list proportional representation and closed list. What that means is like in the closed list, the party itself decides the ranking of the candidates, and voters don't have a choice in terms of like who they rank. Instead of like, it's the party says like these are the top 5 candidates. If we get 2 seats, then the top 2 will get a seat. If we get 3, then the top 3 will get a seat. Open list PR, the list allows the voter to select the candidate that they like most from within a party list. And then if a party gets 5 seats in Congress, then whichever candidate has the most votes gets one of those seats. And then there's like a bunch of different combinations. There's some hybrid systems that try to mix some the proportionality with some of the single district mechanism like in the U.S. And then compared to the ranking systems, so there's RCV, ranked choice voting, where only one person wins in the district, and then there's proportional ranked choice voting, where multiple people can win in that district. The formula there works a bit different, and I don't want to get into those details because it's a lot of numbers. But in essence, even though it's not a mathematically proportional system, proportional ranked choice voting ends up having a flavor of proportionality as well. And these systems, basically, what they try to achieve is like try to cure a lot of the problems that the American electoral system has. So some of the problems like that the fact that swing voters decide like huge elections, like an election is decided by 1 or 2 or 5 votes, something like that. Because in a proportional system, if you're second place, you can still win a seat. So it gets rid of a lot of the zero-sum type of politics. It gets rid of politicians focusing so much on just like the swing voters at the expense of everyone else. And that has, as we'll talk in the panel, it has important ramifications on the types of policies that politicians focus on and the politician behavior as well. So I'll leave it there and we can come back to talk more about it. Oh yeah, and we have a video to explain.
Proportional representation. Proportional representation means that a share of votes gets you a share of seats. These are 4 common types of proportional representation. And one way to understand each of them is, are you voting for a person or are you voting for a party? So at one end of that spectrum, in a closed list system, like they use in Spain, for example, you might not even vote for a candidate, you just vote for a party. Each party wins some percentage of the vote, and those percentages each translate into a certain number of seats. The people who fill those seats come off of each party's list. So voters don't get to choose those candidates. That's the closed part. But there are also open list systems, which are maybe the most common, used in places like Finland, Belgium, Denmark. A standard version of this is you vote for a person, and your vote counts towards a larger party total, sort of like we saw before, determining how many seats each party gets. But in open list, you do choose the candidates. The seats go to the people in each party who got the most votes. Germany uses a system called mixed member proportional. Mixed because in their system you cast 2 votes for a person and for a party. Each district elects 1 person, and those people fill some of the seats in parliament. But the rest of the seats are filled by looking at the party vote and then doling the remaining seats out to the parties until the end product is proportional to the party vote. And the last one we'll look at is the one that Ireland uses to elect its legislature. And this is actually a version of something we're already starting to do in some congressional and local races in the US.
Ranked choice voting.
In ranked choice voting, instead of just voting for one person, you rank multiple candidates. It's a system that encourages you to vote for smaller parties and less established candidates, because if your first choice is unpopular, they use your second choice vote. And that process repeats itself until a certain threshold is reached. On its own, though, ranked choice voting doesn't necessarily make these smaller candidates that much more likely to actually win. They will be at a disadvantage in any election that only one person can win. But if you lower the threshold of victory in a ranked choice race, that produces multiple winners, more proportional to the vote. All of these systems have different formulas for turning votes into representation. What they have in common is they all distribute power proportionally, instead of just relying on this.
So we're putting into practice the idea that when you're explaining a concept to somebody for the first time, it doesn't hurt to hear it more than once and from a different perspective. Dustin, I'm going to go to you next. Your work is focused on the federal level, and the talk of gerrymandering congressional seats is very prevalent in the news right now, right? More than 50 Democratic lawmakers fled the state of Texas to prevent Republicans from redrawing their congressional districts in order to end up with 5 more seats in the US House. So can you speak to how gerrymandering fundamentally distorts representation in our current system?
Yes, happily. As you said, Eileen, it's a topic that I think we're all thinking about right now, what Texas is up to. Fundamentally, I think we have to recognize what gerrymandering is at its core. It's talked about like it's this kind of cute way of getting ahead of the other side, but fundamentally it is the opposite of democracy. It's politicians picking their voters. And so if you have a completely gerrymandered map, you don't have fundamentally what a democracy is supposed to be and supposed to look like. And it's only possible when you use the types of districts that America uses. So it's very important for Americans to understand that we have the preferred system of wannabe authoritarians who want to find ways to, through democracy, get rid of democracy. When Viktor Orban came to power in Hungary, and got a big majority in 2014, the first thing that he did is make his proportional system less proportional and increase the number of single-member districts. They had a system like Germany's. He just increased the number of districts so that you could gerrymander the heck out of it. It's a trend all around the world. There's a bunch of European strongmen that are doing this. Milei in Argentina has talked about wanting to do it. Bukele in El Salvador. So it's a trend that authoritarians like our system. You can only gerrymander effectively when you have single-member districts. Multi-member districts are hard and in many cases impossible to gerrymander. So moving to this type of system would just end, for the most part, gerrymandering in the United States, at least in places where you could draw multi-member districts. I also think that we have to look seriously at what Texas is at its core. That basically so far as in American history when it comes to gerrymandering, it's kind of districting has been kind of governed by a handshake agreement where the two sides are just sort of agreeing to not go further than some invisible standard. The Supreme Court allows gerrymandering, and Texas is just getting more shameless. And if you're a Democrat, you should be uniquely worried about this because Republicans have a built-in geographic advantage in the United States, and they control more state legislatures. So Newsom and other Democrats can try to keep up with gerrymandering their own states, but it is a losing battle ultimately. There is no alternative that can actually fix this problem as a whole other than proportional representation. So how can we get there? It won't be something that happens tomorrow at the federal level. It's a long-term work, and there's the local level and state level is in many ways there's a lot more that can be done immediately there. However, we need to be talking about the whole picture. There is nothing in the Constitution that says that we need to use the system that we have. Article 1, Section 4 gives Congress the power to determine how Congress is elected, and so you could do this with just an act of Congress. Very easy. The barrier right now is a thing called the Uniform Congressional District Act, which is a law from the 60s that was well-intentioned at first. The idea was to prevent states, southern states that were using at-large districts where you'd have multiple members in the district, but not proportional rules, plurality voting rules, so that if the Southern Democratic Party got 51% of the vote, they would have all of the seats for the whole state, and it was a way to strategically lock black voters out of power in the South. So in the 60s, Uniform Congressional District Act said a more proportional system is to use single-member districts so that we're allowing communities to elect their own representative. But it inadvertently prevents the most proportional and the best system, which is one that uses multi-member districts with proportional representation. So you change like 8 words in that law, and states can now begin adopting forms of proportional representation to elect their federal representatives with. And we think that's possible. So we're working on talking to folks on Capitol Hill about legislation to do that. We work with the Blue Dogs in the House. Marie Gluskamp-Perez and Jared Golden introduced the Select Committee on Electoral Reform Act last fall, and then again in January. And the idea is to just have create a committee to study electoral reform and write a report on its findings as a way to kind of move the ball down the field. But it's important for folks on the left to remember that while it's, I think, uniquely important for Democrats to solve the problem of gerrymandering, this is a system that benefits everyone. Republicans would benefit in places like Massachusetts, where there's actually not gerrymandering, it's just that Republicans don't make up a majority of any one district, and they never will, or likely never will. So this is something that's fair. It's good because it's fair. It's a better system, and there are Republicans on Capitol Hill that understand that there are some core problems with the way that our system works because they deal with them themselves. And so it is possible, I believe, to slowly move in a positive direction from that perspective. There's also federal legislation from Fair Vote that they've proposed to adopt a version of PR for the whole country by statute called the Fair Representation Act. The House Progressive Caucus has endorsed the Fair Representation Act. That's I believe, the biggest Democratic caucus. So there's movement happening on Capitol Hill. Obviously, it moves very slowly, but change happens slowly and then all at once. And if there's a moment that we have an opportunity in the next few years, some crisis or something else, to enact major changes, I think this is maybe the most crucial change that we can make to make our democracy better and more representative.
Thanks, Dustin. And the Fair Representation Act was just reintroduced like 2 or 3 weeks ago by Representatives Beyer and Raskin. So you can contact your congressperson to let them know you're in support of this if you walk out of here and are saying, yes, I want proportional representation. Michelle. Right now, Congress is 26% of our Senate and 28% of the House are women. The U.S. Senate, 83 of its 100 members are white. That is not the America that I know. That is not what I think is actually representative of our country. So how can proportional representation help address racial, gender, and just general gaps in representation and decision making?
Thank you, Eileen. I think it's a great question, and one of the first things is to kind of start with looking at like the why do we need to do this? Why is this happening both at the national level, but we do see this happening within our state legislatures as well as at the local level. And there's a recognition that we need to make at the start of this that these systems were not built for us. They weren't built for me in mind. The creation of this was white, wealthy men who were coming together to find a way to order the government. They left out women. They considered black people to be 3/5 of a person. So this system that we have, that we've made incremental changes over the last 250 years, still needs a lot of work and has flaws in terms of who people thought the vision of America was. I will say that, if we think of some of the words of our founding fathers, John Adams did say that that our representative democracy should be a reflection of the community, of the people in miniature. And he was specifically talking about how Congress could look at that. But that applies to every legislative body that is made up of multiple people who are representing different, whether it's districts or the body as a whole. So when we think of that, the why is clear for many people who have been outside of the system and are looking for opportunities. The why is also clear, as I think Dustin mentioned, in terms of there's a benefit for everyone when we change our systems to make sure that it is fair. So we at Represent Women look at this from a lens of like, how do we make sure that with whatever structures that we have in democracy that they are working for women and that they're helping women to advance, but we know that that also helps other communities to advance. And with ranked choice voting, where we've seen it grow in cities that are using it for both elections of mayors, city council members in individual districts, as well as at-large seats in places like Cambridge, Massachusetts, you're seeing more women be elected. You're seeing more women, more people of color being able to run and win and not feel that if two candidates of color are running in the same race, they're going to cancel each other out and their communities aren't going to get the representation. So it's a change in how we look at our systems. And so, as you mentioned with Congress, 26% in the Senate and 29% in the House, women make up 51% of the entire population across the country. And in almost every state jurisdiction, you're probably going to see that women are, if not over the majority, they're very close to, if it's parity. So, but never do you see those bodies truly match the gender diversity. And then when you look at other categories like racial diversity, you're not seeing that either. So the benefit of proportional representation is clear because just like you all sat wherever you wanted to sit here, if I was trying to draw like fair lines around where you are and give you all representation, I couldn't do it. It would be very artificial. It would be very hard to create that. So we know that drawing lines, it's an artificial measure, and with the VRA and particularly looking at single member districts that have helped communities of color have minority districts, we know that that's only a snapshot of where people are. And if you all move around and we have the same districts, we're not going to get that same representation. So the way you do that is through mechanisms while using either multi-member districts or using single-winner districts with ranked choice voting, because you have that ability to better represent the community and you don't have to figure out where is everybody and let's draw the lines to make it work. And so I think there's a larger discussion, and I'm happy to share more in terms of how this is working in other places, but I think it's important to understand that this structural change is going to be going on for years. It's, women being in roles of leadership is still very young in the United States compared to other democracies around the world. And that's a shame for us, considering we are the ones who are going around the world trying to spread democracy, but we're not even sharing or encouraging people to use our forum. So we have work to do, and I think this is one of the biggest opportunities we have. And I know Jenny has more to share about how that's working in Portland.
Thanks, Michelle. All right, Jenny. Our shared city of Portland, Oregon, has received a lot of attention lately within the reform movement after the historic adoption of proportional ranked choice voting. So can you walk us through the city councils, like how the method of how the election was changed, the role that the community the role that the community organizations played, and the outcomes from the first election. It's a big topic, so.
Yes, cut me off if needed. But headline, so much of what Michelle shared about aspirations for democracy actually did come to pass in Portland with the adoption of a proportional ranked choice voting system. So very excited to get to share about that. So Portland, a little bit of background, we actually are fairly different than a lot of areas where there's a historic underrepresentation because we didn't have a system that was gerrymandered within the city. We had at-large first past the post elections. And under that old system, though, it was clear communities of color were not able to elect their candidates of choice. Portland has a very dispersed population of folks of color. And when we looked at maps, when we were considering how can we achieve better representation, you actually can't gerrymander a minority-majority district. And that's actually lumping all folks of color into one aggregate. When you get down to actually talking about all the diversity that exists within that broad grouping, it's impossible to sort of see something where people could feel a sense like that is a district associated with any one community. Adding on top of that, we've seen a great deal of displacement. So even over the course of a decade between times districts are being drawn, it would have been impossible to maintain that concentration. And that was represented in having, I think, never gender parity on city council was one piece, but also historic underrepresentation of folks of color as well as geographically across the city. And then layer on things like class, renters, it was even more limited. But we had a huge opportunity in the city where the city has a charter review commission every decade. So that's where 20 volunteers get together and go through a process looking at the charter, and they have the power to refer items to the ballot to amend it. And so we, in advance of that, have been working on policy reforms for more equitable democracy for some years related to things like public financing, but recognize that this was a significant moment to be able to hold, to take on power and to create a system that actually worked better. And we knew it was very likely that if we didn't do it, someone else was probably going to decide for us. And as we went through that process of policy research, we recognized that whatever kind of the folks with traditional power were going to select, it was not going to be something designed to create more equitable representation. So with the convening of the Charter Commission, we worked from very early on, both teeing up research, working with civic groups to try to advance the conversation around proportional representation. We recruited members for the Charter Commission itself. So that was a really critical piece of it, was making sure that the right people who had strong community connections and knowledge ended up on the Charter Commission. And so ultimately the Charter Commission worked with our Coalition of Communities of Color, so my organization, to conduct extensive community engagement. And so that was with 12 different organizations representing communities of color, folks experiencing housing instability, and others who had been left out of these processes to find out what were the issues they were experiencing, how did they feel about their representation in the city and how government was working for them. Unsurprisingly, the reactions were not positive, but folks were eager to see a greater reflective representation and also the opportunity to have more choice in their elections. People were very excited actually about ranked choice voting, feeling disillusioned or disenfranchised from the current system, that this gave them more power as a voter. So throughout that, we really went through community-driven policy development where we both heard from communities, so what you might think of as like a listening session, but then shared that back with the Charter Commission, who developed these proposals, and then did a second set of workshops with largely the same groups of folks who attended the first set to give input. Then we were able to really go back and workshop this policy to see, does this make sense actually? We, for a long time, weren't actually sure that if we felt like we came back, even if it was mathematically the best system, we wouldn't necessarily, the system would not work if folks were not bought into it and felt like the structure would work for them. So we ended up with a system of 4 multi-winner districts with 12 council members total. So doing some math, 3 council members each. And that was really the minimum we needed in the city to achieve this proportionality. The ballot was ranked choice voting, and the method of tabulation was the single transferable vote, so similar to what exists in Ireland. So that was how we achieved the proportionality. Then, following the referral process after the Charter Commission sent it to the ballot, we moved into a full-on campaign mode, working with many of our partners that we had throughout the community engagement process to advocate for this to win at the ballot with 58% of the vote in November 2022. So this multi-year effort resulted in really resounding support from across the city. We had a broad coalition. It was not just BIPOC and culturally specific organizations, but those like the League of Women Voters or Labor, recognizing that this would give us ultimately more power in our city council. So fast forwarding them to the 2024 election cycle, we worked during that period on implementation, planned a lot for voter education, as well as we have an affiliate 501c4, so also have that separate arm of this work. The highlights from the election cycle itself, we saw a very large and diverse candidate pool. We were able to have the broadest voter education effort that we had seen in the city before, as well as a lot of input politically. So at a kind of unprecedented level, arguably unprecedented level of engagement, and ability for candidates to really get out there and speak to their voters. We also have public financing in the city. So that combination, I believe, of small donor matching funds with proportional representation empowered folks to run and help to give them the, and really feel confident that they could reach out to their base, because they did not have to win half of the voters in the city. They actually were running in their district and needed a much smaller threshold, in the city of Portland, 25% plus 1, in order to win. So the results were, we ended up with the most diverse council ever. So for the first time, gender parity, big news. We had our first millennials on city council, believe it or not. So the first person under 30, but we actually had representation across every decade. So the youngest council member elected was 28 years old, and the oldest was 70. So dramatically different in terms of both age and gender. So for the first time, a quarter of folks were identified as LGBTQ. A quarter of them were renters, and then 5 out of 12 were folks of color. So, but also they had broad support. So we have diversity, but across that, we saw that 85% of Portland voters had at least one of their choices elected. So they could rank 6 candidates. 85% of folks saw one of them get elected. But even more strikingly, we actually had varying between districts, but about 80%, 75 to 80% of folks had somebody that they ranked in their top 3 actually win election. So we both had folks who were like, yeah, it's good enough, I'll rank this person somewhere on my ballot, but actually even strong support was represented in what the outcomes were. And then in every district, we also had representation from a political minority. So some districts had 2 progressives, others might have had 1, but the first time we saw that consistently. For voter experience, we conducted exit polling and found that voters preferred the new system, actually 2 to 1. And 3 out of 4 of them agreed that the system was better, not just because we had a new form of government and people were tired of the way the old rules were working, but actually that because they had multiple winners, they could see greater representation on council. And folks found that casting the ballot was easy. So about 90% said they were confident in how they could fill out their ballot. And then interesting, so I know this is nonpartisan, but some interesting facts also was that 91% of folks ranked multiple candidates, but actually conservatives were by far the most likely to rank one candidate. So that might speak to kind of Portland's political composition, but it was really striking in that essentially if you played out people who ranked progressives highly, they were the most strategic at voting all the way down the ballot. candidates also had a much more positive experience. The League of Women Voters of Portland conducted a series of interviews. They spoke with 11 out of the 12 winning candidates, as well as many of those who were not elected. And 9 out of 11 that were elected said that their decision to run was influenced by having a multi-winner system. They felt that they actually had a chance, even though they might not have come from a traditional kind of political class. They also understood how to run in this election, that they could campaign to their base. So if they really cared about issues impacting renters and low-income or working-class Portlanders, they knew those were the folks they had to get to rank them first, or get them to rank them on their ballot. So that meant that but that was also combined, we didn't see the same kind of polarized campaigning, because candidates recognized that they weren't actually their adversary, the person who was the most politically opposite against them. They actually weren't running to oppose them. They were running to get votes from those constituencies that were likely to support them. Virtually all of the candidates agreed that it reduced negative campaigning and that they were able to focus on positive policy issues. Then we also saw some degree, like a little bit like New York City, not as closely, but some degree of collaboration. So folks helping each other campaign. And then in one case, actually just direct coordination on campaigning, where two candidates in the same district ran together on a slate. So we now are in our first year of the new city council. We've seen governance start to play out, where we actually have different blocks of electeds on council collaborating very effectively and being in strategic alliance across their districts. We've also seen a lot more transparency in how our council has been interacting. So there's actually a lot more, I'd say, arguments on the dais, or times where people are really having some more intense conversations that we know in the past had always occurred behind closed doors. So that's been striking, but that I've heard a lot of positive things, actually, that folks have more confidence in their electeds because they know they really are hearing some of the arguments play out in real time and in front of them, versus being decided behind closed doors as it was in our previous system. So a lot is to be seen on how it plays out in governance, but in terms of the election, the campaign itself, and the outcomes, we really have fulfilled those promises, I think, for this first election around proportionality, equity, and fairness in Portland.
Thanks, Jenny. I mean, those stats that you're sharing about how truly representative the council is now are even more staggering when you compare it to where we were previously in Portland. Like, we did not have, the first Black woman who served on city council was elected in 2018. So can you share just a little bit of some of the history of Portland, like the renters not being on council, and really the geographic divide with East Portland not being represented, which it now is?
Yeah, so our executive director at CCC would joke that he had known every Black person elected on city council over the past century. And so he is older, but he is not that old that he should know every person of color or every Black person elected to city council over the past 100 years. So it really illustrates that we had a severe lack of folks. We had never had any Asian Americans elected to council. We now had 2 during this past cycle. And we had never had, we had had times actually over the last decade where there were no women represented on the 5-person council. So over that kind of broader period, there were, I'd say, 1 to 2, depending on the cycle. And notably often it would be like 1 renter out of 5, if even that. And as mentioned, we had no millennials ever elected. And this time we actually now have about 2/3, actually, I think, it's a broad range, but identify as millennials on our city council. And then finally, geographically, we had the east part of the city that was the most racially diverse, as well as the lowest income in the city, had only ever had 2 people elected, again, over that 100 years. And a significant concentration of folks coming from the wealthiest parts of the city, unsurprisingly, And then again, historically, many times, I would say probably, actually I've never done this, but if you looked back over the time spans, how much we even had any person of color on council, at least over the past 15 years, we went for many kind of cycles where we did not have anybody represented there. So it was really exciting to see that now it is a dramatically different council when you look at that representation.
Thanks, Jenny. So it's an exciting time that we have this now in Portland. Michelle, you're working on it in Maryland. We have many people across the country working on it in their various cities. But as we mentioned at the beginning, it can be done at the federal level as well. We were talking last night about how this is a relatively young panel of folks that we've got here, and how much we want to be hearing our voices more. So can Oscar and Dustin, you kind of speak to the generational divide that we have in Congress, and how you could kind of vision America if we had proportional representation in Congress?
Sure. The U.S. is quite unique in the gerontocracy that it has, even compared to European countries, other countries in the world. The U.S. has the fewest number of legislators under 35, and the most legislators over retirement age in the U.S. That's for a lot of many reasons. The one reason that I think contributes to this a lot is that young people just can't start their own party if they want to. A lot of European parties that have emerged in recent years that have really shaken politics in Europe and in a bunch of Latin American countries, they start because young people were frustrated with not being heard by older people, or older parties not taking serious issues like climate change or housing. But the electoral systems there allow them to be like, you know what, I'll start my own party, and it's viable, and they can win seats, and maybe they'll win one the first time, but then eventually win more seats. So I think that's one big impediment in the United States, that it's just impossible for young people who are frustrated with the system to make their voice heard through organizing and through a party to win representation.
I'll just quickly add to that. I mean, we talk about the two-party system, but functionally, America really has two one-party systems, because 80-90% of congressional districts are uncompetitive between the two parties. We're competing over just an increasingly small patch of land. And that means that there's just not a lot of competition. There's functionally very little you can do if you're on the outside trying to get involved in politics, and your local, party is keeping the door shut to you. So it's being able to start your own party, and it's just getting involved in the process as it exists. There's a lot of just momentum going in one direction. It's very hard for young people to get involved. So Oscar and I have a report that's coming out in the next few weeks here that gets into this, and we're hoping that issues like the old age of Congress and a lot of the other things that are ailing our system, people can start to understand that some of these things are a reflection of the unique electoral system that we have, and that's why we have some of these unique problems.
Thank you.
Eileen, could I just add, so you have the electoral systems that add to this, but within the specific parties, because of our party structure, we do need to do work in terms of how you're building your benches and who's getting nominated and moved forward in different roles. And for the most part, and particularly in American democracy, like in the United States, there is not a clear process to make sure that we are giving women equal opportunities for those to be looked at in certain roles or to be the nominee for certain positions. And like we mentioned with some of the other forums, like mixed member proportional systems, there's a process where not only with the party list, but there's a gender quota that might be included. And one example of this might be looking at Mexico. So if you look at just North American countries, Mexico is near gender parity with their parliament, and they've elected the first women president, so they're moving in that direction. They have a mixed member system. They also have that kind of list. So there's some requirements in terms of having women candidates on the ballot to run. That can be something that can be taken on in the United States to really help that. And in some cases, particularly within the Democratic Party, and I full disclosure, I have a role within the Democratic Party in Maryland. We have a clear process of, a quota for you have to elect a male and a female position to certain district seats. There's sometimes like a non-binary option that's available there. So there's these requirements that exist at certain levels, but don't always carry forward beyond maybe internal party structure to how we're actually putting nominees forward and making sure that we have balanced representation in who's running for office. So there's an opportunity that we can look at other systems both nearby and all over the world that will help with that. That, it's not just our electoral systems, but we have these structures that are in place that weren't designed initially with many of us in mind, or the thoughts whether it was based on age, race, gender, and part of it is chipping at what are the things that help to reduce that barrier, but we know will lift that barrier for many of us to be able to have our roles, see ourselves reflected in the government in different ways.
Thank you, Michelle. So this is Netroots. A lot of you, I'm sure, have issues that are really important to you, whether it's climate action, reproductive rights, healthcare for all. Those are maybe the things that bring you to this moment, right? Democracy might not be at the top of your list, but it should be. I want you to walk out of here saying, yes, I want to be an electoral reformer, because it is how we are going to get gains on any of the other issues that a lot of us care about, is by fundamentally fixing the way that we elect the people that are making these decisions. Because if we don't, it's going to stay the same, and we're going to keep not having them be responsive to us. So with that, I want to turn it over to you all. Does any of you have questions for our panelists about proportional representation? Yeah.
Jenny, can you tell me, you said that there was one happy rate in Portland on the moon. Did you guys break that down for conservatives and progressives? Is there a difference between their happiness levels? I'd like to speak to the conservatives when I talk, this isn't choir. I'd like to sing elsewhere.
Yeah, actually I have not. I could go back and look that up. So Portland is about 13% Republican. So we are, when we talk about the political spectrum, historically, I don't know that we've ever had somebody who was, well, maybe arguably but registered Republicans, for example, your chances of getting elected in the city would be extremely unlikely. Period, no matter the system. That being said, I think it's possible that there are times where somebody, say, might be endorsed by the Republican Party. I think that that's definitely conceivable where someone might be able to get elected. So just because of our demographics, I think folks have remained, I don't think it shifted them too much, but I am happy. We should definitely follow up and I will take a look, because I do have a lot of thoughts when we've kind of talked in different communities about actually there are many ways for folks, I think, who don't agree with the extremism in the Republican Party, that actually should be really appealing, because they don't have to switch and give up all of their other policy priorities. They can say, I'm looking for somebody who might be economically conservative or somewhat socially conservative, but I don't want a tax on trans kids in my communities. So I think that the potential is really there, especially in nonpartisan races. And so this is me speculating, so please other folks jump in, but I think especially there where there are gradations and folks can start to see that for people who are frustrated with feeling like there's nobody who really represents their perspectives on council, or they've been put off by some of that. So,
and we do have groups like the Cato Institute or other groups that are more conservative that are interested in proportional representation and other methods that really help to give conservative voters in areas like Massachusetts where they're blocked from having representation opportunities too. So this isn't just one-sided, it really does depend on the context of where we're seeing this happen, but yeah, there's lots of opinions.
I'll just add to that, we recently commissioned a study with a mathematician for Massachusetts that showed like basically with the current system, there's no way for Republicans to get representation in the state legislature, just because of the distribution of the voters in the state. And then if you switch to a more proportional system, it would actually reflect. I think they usually tend to get like 30% of the votes in like state level elections, and you would get Republicans actually getting about 30% of the votes as well. So it benefits everyone. And then just the one other thing I wanted to add is one concern we hear a lot when talking about proportional representation is people look at Europe and see some of the far right parties that are able to emerge and actually win representation. And it's like, oh wait, but we don't want that here. But the thing that a multi-party system has allowed in Europe to do is a lot of European countries have successfully, and they're still trying to vote for, isolated far-right parties in Europe. So it's the cordon sanitaire is called, like this like sanitary cordon to not work with the far-right parties. So yes, they can win representation because they have like some popular support, but they're not able to influence policy once they're in government because none of the other parties will work with them. So it's a good kind of like pressure valve release for the system, so that an extremist party doesn't have to take the entire system. It's like, okay, we'll give them some seats, but we're not working with them.
Thank you for this panel, and I really agree with like the last thing you said. If we want everything else, like this is like a big like prologue step. I feel like we had a bite at that apple in 2021 with Freedom to Vote Act and For the People Act to an extent. Right now, there's like other, I think, very popular sort of nonpartisan issues like in Citizens United or banning stock trading. Has there ever been like from a campaign level conversations of like connecting with some of those other like good governance type campaigns to create like a platform that candidates can sort of like latch on to at any sort of level to just like shine more of a light on proportional voting?
I can jump in here. Yes, ongoing. I should, you know, this is something that's important for us that we need to do better. But I mean, we say, you know, sell the brownie and not the recipe. The recipe is proportional representation, but those are two very long words and, you know, hard to say. And remember, the brownie is fix the system, make politics work, end gridlock, you know, break up the two-party system. I was last year communications director for Dan Osborne in Nebraska, running as an independent, and probably the second most common message that Dan would say is break the two-party doom loop, and you'd have MAGA hat wearers in rural Nebraska bars nodding along saying, yes, we want that too. So from a messaging standpoint, I think there's a lot of natural alliance, you know, with some of these other organizations, yeah, I mean, if there's an HR 1 or some kind of, you know, large legislation moving at some point in the future where that's possible, I would want to see things like the legislation I was talking about earlier included in that, so that states can begin doing this themselves.
I feel like hi, Daniela with the Green New Deal Network. I feel like when I talk to especially young people who are disillusioned with democracy about things like federal electoral reform, democracy reform at large, I get the response like, that's cute and also impossible. Like, what would you say to people who immediately write it off as like too big of an issue to even touch?
First I would, you know, accept the reality that like it can, in this very moment, feel very challenging to say we're going to reform the system, and we, you know, Don Beyer and Jamie Raskin have introduced a bill. We're really excited. I think we all have we're clear-eyed. It's not moving anywhere, you know, but we know like it's there and it's a discussion point. What I think is important is to have, if people only know that level and only know like there's things happening there, it's a good point to bring them in for the discussion that needs to happen at the local level. So I'm the executive director for Ranked Choice Voting Maryland, along with being the board chair for Represent Women. And so my work is in Maryland advancing election reform, advancing ranked choice voting, whether it's for single winner races or for the proportional system. And we help to show people like, we don't want to see the dysfunction in Congress. So we want to see our cities working better and our state legislators working more effectively together. How can we make that happen? And putting forward ideas that they can see that real change at the local level. Because I think also if we're moving in that direction, we get more cities, more counties, more states to adopt systems that really do create that fair representation for all, you're going to see more of a groundswell of people who are like, why do we have this, broken system up here when, we have now a multitude of voters who across states in different areas who see a system that really more reflects their community. So I get that, but I hope that they'll be willing and take a look at what's going on in their state, that they could get connected to those local programs, those local organizations that are working on implementing this, because it does really start at the local level, and you can make a really deep impact in terms of helping move that forward. And love to talk to you about what we're doing in Maryland, but we have lots of different states, and I know you're showing the map of like where we have different work happening, and that's the most important, getting connected locally.
Can I also just really quickly say, I have a friend who's a journalist who 3 years ago had that exact conversation, said almost exactly what you said. That's cute, but Congress can't do anything right now, so why talk about this? And just a few months ago, we had almost exactly the same conversation. Said Congress can't do anything right now, so we need to talk about this. And if the scale of the problem is as bad as we all think, you need to, at some point, examine what would it take to actually fix the problem and then work backwards from there. So it's hard, and it's a good question, but that's what I think we're going
I have a question.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm from California. So we are currently going through this redistricting crisis, I guess, for our state, because we have an amendment to our constitution that provides for a third-party districting commission as opposed to the legislature drawing our maps. Our organization is in Southern California, so we're heavily involved in that effort right now with the governor's office and with the legislature, because 3 of the 5 seats are going to be from our region that would be redistricted. So just hoping you all may be able to talk about the problems that can come out of this kind of gerrymandering fight that we're going to have. It's not just going to be us. I think New York is going to enter into that ring as well. So what kind of problems that's leading us into? Obviously, the bigger picture is proportional representation, but as we're trying to find these temporary solutions to having access to power, and when we have all these other states that are completely cutting off democracy for their own constituents, I just wanted to learn more about the problems that we're finding in blue states.
Similar to California and Maryland, I know like our House Majority Leader has spoken openly about how he wants to be actively involved in gerrymandering our districts more, which I think that there's some conversation of like, it's almost like escalating it in every state of like, okay, well, you guys aren't going to do it, so we're going to do even more, and oh, you're going to do more, we're going to do more. So we have to figure out a way that brings that down and actually brings out like, how do we solve this problem? Because they're not. I think it's a very temporary and a dangerous solution in the sense of it tries to solve a problem in the most immediate way, but will in most cases come back in a different way that it's going to impact them larger. And I think we made the point earlier that the Democrats right now, where they do have control, are not going to be able to do anything to create more, like they're not going to get more seats that really help them make a difference. So it's a little bit of is this the best strategy of spending time on this, where you're creating more of a war against Republicans who are doing it, versus figuring out how do we make that systemic change that we reform the entire system. So I think it's a larger conversation about how do we talk to party leaders, how do we talk to community groups about the other alternatives that there are. I don't know if I have an easy solution on how that works, but I just, to what Dustin was saying, we have to make it a question of what's going on. Everyone that you talk to is going to say that they don't like gerrymandering and they don't want gerrymandering. Yet we're allowing it to happen on both sides. We're allowing, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, you're allowing those leaders to continue to do that behavior. So how do we change that and hold them accountable to something that we know we don't want to have in our democracy structure?
Yeah, there's going to keep being that happening across the country until we have a systemic fix. So that's things like the Fair Representation Act, something happening at the federal level to say, no more, we're changing this. The Fair Rep Act also would make it so that you can't do mid-cycle redistricting as well. So we're at the end of our time here. So I just want to encourage you all to get involved. Contact your member of Congress about the Fair Representation Act. If you are saying, hey, I think that this would be a benefit for my city council, these are all of the groups that my national organization works with. There are 35 of our state partners. So like there are people working on this in communities around the country, maybe already in your state, working on ranked choice voting and proportional representation. So there is change to be had, and I invite you all to join us. And thank you so much for coming today.